Yep. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ms. Abir Lemseffer. Kindly let us know what the AAA Adaptation of African Agriculture initiative is all about.
Okay. So the AAA initiative is an initiative that I can say from Africa, for Africa. It was launched at the COP22, when the COP22 was held in an African land. It was in Morocco.
2016.
Absolutely, 2016, November. And it is also adopted by the African Union as being the, let's say, the voice of the adaptation of the African agriculture. So just to give you some background is when Morocco was hosting the COP22, our first thinking was to say that we wanted to do something for the continent, taking into account the stake of agriculture in the continent. I mean, I'm sure you know the figures, but let's say them again, just to have the ideas more clear. You know that when you talk about agriculture in Africa, you are talking about more than a half of employment. You are talking about, in some countries, more than 30% of the GDP, etc., etc. And what we have noticed also is that there were, you know, the COP21 in France has brought l'Accord de Paris, okay, and has the Paris Agreement, and has brought also a very big expectations and hope about climate finance and what climate finance can bring to help countries. And when we saw the figures, you see that only 5% of the climate funds go to the African continent. And even for agriculture in the whole world, only 5% of the climate funds go to agriculture. Why? Because agriculture was seen most of the time as a threat. Agriculture was incriminated as being a cause of climate change and not as a solution. Okay, so our basic idea is first to put agriculture and to advocate, because I will explain later, we have two principal missions, advocacy and projects, and I will explain to you later. But this mission of advocacy was just to force the door of the climate community, and I can tell you that the climate community was a little bit close to the agriculture sector, because climate world prefers to talk about renewable energies, electrification, etc. That is good. I'm not saying that it's bad, but the thing is, the agriculture was never a part of the solution. And the agriculture of the country, I don't know if you have been with us this morning in the donor session, where you have all the agriculture African ministers talking, that today the agriculture of the continent is very much affected by climate change. So, and from that time, we have achieved that for the first time in history, in the declaration of the COP22, agriculture was mentioned as being a part of the solution. I mean, we can give it to you and you can find it yourself. Also, the year after, from COP23, you know that in the COPs, you have the SABSTA. I don't know if you know the SABSTA. The SABSTA is like the technical team who negotiates. For the first time, there were people from agriculture in the SABSTA talking about the challenges of agriculture and talking about how agriculture can be a solution. And after that, now we are, I don't know if you have heard about the Global Committee for Adaptation. Global Committee for Adaptation is an adaptation that were created by the UN, the World Bank, Bill Gates Foundation, and some very important players to how can I say, to build a vision on adaptation all over the world. And AAA was identified, you can see it on the report, as being key player of the landscape of adaptation in the world. And the second thing is that, talking again about the climate funds, we have noticed that, for example, let me give you a very specific example. The GCF, you know it, right? The Global Climate Facility, which is the fund that receives now all the billions that were promised in the Paris Agreement. For example, they allow to each country an amount of money, I think it's about $2 million, to make what we call readiness. Is that you have projects, you use this money to make projects ready. The thing is...
Available funds.
Absolutely. You make your project bankable with this money. So what we have also noticed is that African countries, in the majority of time, don't have the capacity building. They don't have the people, and the people are not used to talk with the funders. And you know that every funder has specific processes, very heavy processes. So our role is to accompany African countries to get ready to have access to funds, and now we are already working with 7 countries. We have finished with Mali and Côte d'Ivoire. We had World Bank and German financing, and we have built, I think you saw this morning, this climate smart agriculture investment plan. So now they have a plan with several projects that they can present to financing. And we are working with 4 more countries, which are Congo, Cameroon, Ghana, and Burkina Faso.
Interesting.
So basically, this is our role. And we do also a lot of capacity building, but not necessarily capacity building on agriculture techniques, because, you know, private sector can do it. For example, I don't know, you can bring, some water management company that do the drip and irrigation that can provide capacity building for small farmers. From our side, we do capacity building more on the governmental side. So we do capacity building for directors in the ministries to have access to the fund, and how to structure a strategy, how to make it bankable for funders, how to talk, the language of the DFIs.
The terminologies, yeah. Interesting perspective. To something you made mention of, why did some people view agriculture as a danger in the past? Why did they view agriculture as something bad in the past? The climate change community.
I think that they have seen agriculture as a kind of danger, and agriculture was seen only like a carbon, a gas emission provider, because of it was, if I can say it, not. I don't want to be blamed for that, but I think it's a more North vision, because when you talk about big agricultural countries, France, USA, Spain, etc., all the industry of cattle, all the meat industry. Yes, this industry is definitely a cause of gas emissions. We do agree about that, but when you turn your eyes into the African continent, you have, as you may know, all the cattling sector in Africa is more an extensive way to breed cattle. There are problematics that are completely different from the north side. And the thing is that Africa is already suffering from climate change. So, for example, this morning was mentioned the case of Mozambique. I don't know if you remember, maybe 1 year ago, where there was this incredible floods because of climate change, and they had their corn cultures completely erased. So they are in need to develop climate smart agriculture approaches so that they can manage the impact of climate change on their agriculture, on their food security, because it's all about food security also. And it's also for us a manner to advocate the fact that when you talk about adaptation to climate change, you are not necessarily talking about reducing productivity or gambling with food security. No, we can have food security, we can have high productivity with respect to the environment, and because now we have several techniques in the world that have proven that. And the thing is, I forgot to mention that since the beginning, and I think you can see today with the scientific panel, AAA have been based on a very solid scientific base, which we have a lot of R&D centers all over the world that are all contributing with the know-how. And each time we are working with a country, we have experts from all over the world, and we try the most that we can to find the techniques within the countries. This technique of how to adapt this culture or this culture to climate change.
One or two more questions to go. An interesting perspective you've given. How do you propose the AAA can address the dangers to Africa's national security as a result of climate change? What are the
you are talking about national security.
Do you think the AAA can?
Well, I think yes, because as you mentioned and as you may know, that now it is proven that all the migration streams are completely linked with climate change and food security. People leave areas because the cattle don't have anything to eat anymore, because of dryness, because of water scarcity, etc., etc. So there is, a certain, and that's why I think that you probably know also, we are discussing with the European Union, because I think that you probably know that the last speech of President of the European Commission, Juncker, he made a very ambitious speech on Africa and what is the vision of the European Union for the development of Africa. And he said quite clearly that as now the migration is a very high stake in Europe, so the European Union is thinking about how to invest money very specifically in the agriculture sector and in the adaptation of the agriculture sector to climate change, in order to keep the people on their land and because you cannot address, and this is something very important in the vision of AAA, as I told you, we are not tackling the adaptation subject in a way to say that, okay, we are going to hide food security or even the yield of the farmers, because they need food, but also they need decent life. So we are trying to put into our thinking and our approach that we have to keep all those priorities: food security, how to secure a decent income for farmers, and adaptation to climate change, so that if they build a project, that it can be a sustainable project that will bring them yield for years and years.
Interesting. One final question. How do you think Africans and the AAA, people in the climate change field on the continent, how do you think they can monitor progress towards sustainable food security on the continent? How do you think how would AAA monitor progress?
Yeah, sure. You know that this is our first conference, ministerial conference after the launch. But we made one in 2016. I think you have participated in it. And that was in order to have the buy-in of all the African countries before the launch of the COP22. Today we have created our foundation. One thing very important to know, and is going to be mentioned tomorrow by the president of the foundation, who is the Moroccan minister, that this ministerial conference belongs to the governance committees of our foundation. Every year we will organize this meeting to have the buy-in of the countries and to have, the political orientation of the year. So definitely, from now on, we will monitor. What we want to monitor. I mean, food security, yes, but just to be honest, the subject of food security is monitored by other players. For example, if you take the FAO, they are already monitoring that. But we will monitor the climate funds going to the African agriculture. This is what we want to tackle. And also, it is very important because we are also pushing all the DFIs. For example, there was a question this morning from the Malian Minister of Agriculture saying, okay, we are ready, but sometimes the funders have very heavy processes, and from
bureaucracy.
Sorry?
Bureaucracy.
Yes, bureaucracy, and also, they are organized in a way that they have a certain envelope for this country. So when you bring a project, sometimes it can be a very good project, but they will tell you, oh, sorry, the envelope of the country is have been completely used, so we don't have money now, so you have to wait 2 years, etc. So we are now pushing the funders to even them to find an innovative project engineering so that they can create, for example, regional envelopes where when you bring a project of adaptation of the agriculture to climate change, you can tackle this envelope, etc. So what actually we want to monitor is more what is linked to the adaptation of the African agriculture. And we are working with everybody. You will see tomorrow that we will have 2 MOU. We have 4 MOUs, but to be signed. But 2 of them is one with the FAO. Well, we're going to collaborate, not to repeat maybe the same studies and to call another experts for something that has already been done, etc.
Interesting. One final question. Obviously, your role as the Director General of the AAA must be tasking. How tasking has your role been? How difficult has your role been as the Director General of AAA?
Well, I don't really think about it as being difficult because it's a very strong believing that I have that we can build tremendous things for this continent, and that it's all about men and women. When you find the good persons, and this is something that we have reached. We have been working with Mali, Côte d'Ivoire, all those countries, and we find tremendous people that really have the willing to tackle this subject of climate change. And so yes, it's a bit difficult to do this matchmaking. It is difficult to do the advocacy. Just to give you an example, during the process, in one time I had quite conflictual discussion with the GCF because the GCF was telling us, okay, the processes are this way, so when you send the demand, you have to wait 6 months, and the difficulty of my job is telling the GCF, look, if I don't oblige you to change your manner of work because there is an emergency in the African continent, what is my added value? So yes, if you can talk about not difficulty, I prefer the word challenge, is more to convince people, and also to convince people, in the African countries. For example, this morning it was discussed also, because you can, for example, you can work with the Minister of Agriculture and his team. Okay, you work, you prepare the job, but after that, he has to take his project that you have built with him, and he has to take it to his Minister of Finance, to his Prime Minister. He has to do an advocacy work within the country, and this is not easy. I mean, as you may know, political balances are very specific to each country, and you know, for example, in the African continent, this subject of climate change is tackled in a very different levels. For example, you can find countries where you have a specific advisor of the head of states who only cares about climate change, and this make our job easier because, you know, the process of decision is more easier,
faster.
But you have other countries where climate change is a direction of the Ministry of I don't know, you know, energies or something. So this is a kind of the challenge that we are
facing.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice talking to you, ma'am. Lovely interview.